We live in paradoxical times, where information flows as never before, yet the understanding of the fundamental structures that govern our lives seems increasingly obscure. One such structure, perhaps the most omnipresent and least questioned, is money itself. We accept the notes in our wallets, the digits in our bank accounts, as concrete, almost natural realities. But what is this force that mediates our exchanges, stores our effort, and silently shapes our future? The dominant narrative, woven by the architects of the modern financial system, the central banks and the institutions that orbit around them, assures us that fiat money, decreed by governments and not backed by any tangible asset, is the pinnacle of monetary evolution, a flexible tool, managed by experts, capable of smoothing economic cycles and promoting general prosperity. However, beneath this surface of stability and benevolent control lies a much more complex and, for many, disturbing reality. A reality where the value of our labor and savings is systematically eroded, where access to capital is unevenly distributed, and where individual freedom itself is increasingly conditioned by the decisions of a small group of central planners. Questioning this narrative is not just an intellectual exercise, it is an act of resistance. It is beginning to unravel the threads that make up the tapestry of our modern monetary slavery, a form of servitude as subtle as it is effective, which binds us not by physical chains, but by digits and decrees. How did we get to this point? And, more crucially, are there escape routes? History, economic theory, and recent technological innovation offer us intriguing clues, pointing to alternatives that challenge the state's monopoly on money. Gold, with its age-old luster and its history as an incorruptible store of value, and Bitcoin, the enigmatic digital creation of the information age, emerge not only as investment assets, but as potential tools of liberation. And, echoing through the decades, the ideas of Ludwig von Mises, one of the most ardent critics of state interventionism and a defender of sound money, provide a powerful theoretical framework for understanding both the disease and the possible antidote. This analysis proposes to delve into the depths of these questions, to deconstruct the mechanisms that perpetuate the current system, and to explore, rigorously and without concessions, the potential of gold and Bitcoin, in light of Misesian thought, as beacons in the midst of the fog of centralized monetary engineering. It is not a search for easy answers or magical solutions, but an invitation to critical reflection on the nature of money and the future of economic freedom. After all, understanding the rules of the game is the first step to, perhaps, just perhaps, starting to play a different game. The journey of money, from the shells and precious stones of primitive societies to the complex financial instruments of today, is a fascinating saga about the human search for an efficient medium of exchange, a stable unit of account, and a lasting store of value. Gold, with its unique properties, rarity, durability, divisibility, fungibility, portability, and intrinsic beauty, emerged organically over millennia as the preferred form of money in various cultures and civilizations. It was not a royal decree or a conspiracy that crowned gold, but a process of market discovery, a natural monetary selection where the yellow metal's characteristics proved superior to those of its competitors. The classical gold standard, which prevailed with greater or lesser rigor from the 19th century to the beginning of the 20th century, represented the apogee of this era. Money was gold, or notes and bank deposits directly convertible into gold at a fixed rate. This system imposed an iron discipline on governments and banks. The expansion of credit and the money supply was limited by existing gold reserves, making uncontrolled inflation a rare and difficult phenomenon to sustain. Excessive government spending or chronic deficits found a natural break in the inability to simply print more gold. Ludwig von Mises saw in the gold standard not only an efficient monetary system, but an essential safeguard of individual liberty against state tyranny. For Mises, sound money was an instrument of the citizen against despotic governments, as it restricted the state's ability to finance its ambitions, wars, pharaonic projects, arbitrary wealth redistribution, through currency devaluation, a hidden and regressive tax. The First World War marked the beginning of the end. The belligerent governments, needing to finance their war efforts far beyond their fiscal capacities, suspended the convertibility of their currencies into gold. It was the original sin of the modern fiat era. Although attempts to restore some form of gold standard occurred in the interwar period, such as the gold exchange standard, the discipline had been broken. The Great Depression, wrongly attributed by many to the rigidity of gold, provided the final pretext for governments to break free from the golden shackles. The coup de grace came in 1971, when U.S. President Richard Nixon unilaterally suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold for foreign central banks, ending the Bretton Woods system and inaugurating the era of purely fiat money on a global scale. Since then, we have lived through a monetary experiment without historical precedent. All the world's currencies are defined by government decree, their value fluctuating in relation to each other and, crucially, losing purchasing power over time due to the continuous expansion of their supply by central banks. The promise was of managed stability and growth. The reality has been more pronounced boom and bust cycles, recurrent financial crises, and a constant erosion of the value of savings. It is in this context of disillusionment with the fiat experiment that the appeal of gold resurfaces and the innovation of Bitcoin finds fertile ground, one of the most insidious mechanisms through which the fiat system perpetuates what Mises would see as a form of servitude is the naturalization of inflation. We are conditioned to accept a certain level of price increase as normal, inevitable, even desirable. The 2% per year inflation target is a mantra repeated by central bankers and mainstream economists. Moderate inflation is presented as a necessary lubricant for the economy, encouraging consumption and investment and avoiding the dreaded deflation. However, this narrative obscures the true nature of inflation in a fiat regime. It is not a natural phenomenon like the tides or the seasons, but the direct and inevitable result of the expansion of the money supply by central banks, far beyond the growth in the production of goods and services. When the central bank creates money out of nothing, whether by printing notes or, more commonly today, by expanding bank credit through open market operations or reducing reserve requirements, this new money enters the economy and competes for existing goods and services, raising their nominal prices. Mises was relentless in his analysis. Inflation is, in essence, a policy, not an accident. It is a form of taxation. Without legislation, a disguised confiscation of the purchasing power of the population. Worse still, its effects are not uniform. The new money does not spread through the economy homogeneously and instantaneously, like water poured on a flat surface. It enters at specific points, usually through the banking system and government spending, benefiting those who receive it first: banks, large corporations, government contractors, beneficiaries of social programs. Before general prices have risen, these first receivers can buy goods and services at still relatively low prices. As the money circulates, prices rise, and those who receive the new money last, wage earners, pensioners, small savers, find that their purchasing power has decreased. This phenomenon, known as the Cantillon effect, described by Richard Cantillon in the 18th century and elaborated upon by Mises and other Austrian economists, reveals inflation not only as a tax, but as a massive mechanism for redistributing wealth, from the last to the first receivers, from the poor and the middle class to the financial and politically connected elite. Gold and Bitcoin, by their nature, offer resistance to this manipulation. The supply of gold is limited by geology and the cost of extraction. It cannot be increased by decree. The supply of Bitcoin is even more rigid, defined by an immutable mathematical algorithm, with a maximum limit of 21 million units. No central bank, no government can print more gold or Bitcoin to finance its spending or dilute the value of others' possessions by choosing to hold part of their wealth in these assets. Individuals can, in theory, protect themselves from the inflationary erosion inherent in the fiat system and escape the Cantillon effect. It is a form of vote of no confidence in the centralized management of money and a search for a store of value that cannot be arbitrarily degraded. The difficulty of mining gold or Bitcoin increases as more resources are dedicated to it, creating a negative feedback that stabilizes the growth of the supply, in contrast to the ease with which a central bank can create trillions with a few clicks on the keyboard. This verifiable scarcity is the core of their value proposition as sound money, a direct antidote to the inflationary policy that disguises itself as economic normality. Another pillar that sustains the edifice of modern monetary slavery is the deliberate complexity and opacity of the financial system, the arcane language of economists, the impenetrable mathematical models, the endless reports from central banks. All of this contributes to creating an aura of specialization and authority that intimidates the common citizen and discourages scrutiny. We are led to believe that monetary policy is a complex science, best left in the hands of enlightened technocrats who possess the knowledge and tools to navigate the turbulent waters of the global economy. Questioning their decisions would be like a layman questioning the diagnosis of a neurosurgeon. This mystification, however, serves a clear purpose: to isolate the process of creating and managing money from democratic control and public understanding. Mises argued that economics, especially monetary theory, should not be an esoteric field. Its fundamental principles, based on human action and the logic of choice, could and should be understood by anyone willing to think critically. The artificial complexity of the current system is not a sign of sophistication, but a protective barrier. Behind the jargon like quantitative easing, repurchase agreements, or flexible inflation targets lie mechanisms that are often simple in their essence: the creation of new money and its selective injection into the economy, the manipulation of interest rates to artificially low levels, which Mises saw as the primary cause of unsustainable economic cycles, and the bailout of financial institutions considered too big to fail. Opacity allows these actions, with their profound distributive consequences and their moral hazards, to be implemented with little or no accountability to the public. Who really benefits when the central bank buys trillions in government bonds or private assets? How does the suppression of interest rates affect the saving or investment decisions of an ordinary individual versus a hedge fund? These questions are rarely answered clearly and directly. The system operates under a veil, and most people simply trust or resign themselves that they know what they are doing. Gold, in its tangible simplicity, represents a counterpoint to this fabricated complexity. Its value does not depend on econometric models or the credibility of a monetary policy committee. It is a physical asset, understood and valued for millennia. Bitcoin, although technologically sophisticated, also offers radical transparency in its operation. Its protocol is open source, anyone can audit the code. All transactions are recorded on a public and immutable ledger, the blockchain. Bitcoin's monetary policy, the rate of issuance of new coins and the maximum supply, is transparent, predictable, and extremely difficult to change. There are no closed-door meetings, no ambiguous statements. The rules of the game are clear and enforced by the consensus of the decentralized network, not by the will of a central authority. This transparency and predictability contrast sharply with the discretion and opacity of central banks. By choosing gold or Bitcoin, individuals are opting for a monetary system whose rules are more comprehensible and less subject to hidden manipulation. It is a rejection of financial technocracy and an affirmation of the right to understand and control the means that store the fruit of their labor. The demystification of money, a process that Mises passionately defended, finds in gold and Bitcoin potential tools to make monetary power more transparent and, consequently, more contestable. Individual autonomy, the ability to make decisions about one's own life without undue coercion, is a central value for the classical liberal philosophy that Mises represents, and few areas affect this autonomy as much as control over one's own financial resources. The fiat money system managed by central banks, although often presented as a promoter of the stability necessary for freedom to flourish, in practice imposes a series of subtle and not so subtle restrictions on the individual's financial sovereignty. Persistent inflation, as already discussed, is the first and most obvious of these. It forces individuals to become investors or speculators simply to preserve their purchasing power, pushing them into complex and often risky financial markets, where, again, asymmetric information and the Cantillon effect favor insiders. The alternative, keeping money in a checking account or under the mattress, is a sentence of slow and constant impoverishment. Prudent saving, once a virtue, becomes an irrational act in the long run. Beyond inflation, the manipulation of interest rates by central banks distorts the fundamental economic calculation that Mises considered essential for the coordination of production and consumption over time. Artificially low interest rates discourage saving and encourage indebtedness and investment in projects that would not be viable in free market conditions. This not only sows the seeds of future crises, the Austrian business cycle theory, but also penalizes savers and rewards debtors, profoundly altering individual incentives and life trajectories. The ability to plan one's financial future with some security is undermined by uncertainty about the future value of money and the future cost of capital. More directly, the centralized financial system allows a level of surveillance and control over individual transactions without precedent. Every card payment, every bank transfer, every deposit is recorded, monitored, and potentially subject to scrutiny or intervention. Regulations like Know Your Customer, KYC, and Anti-Money Laundering, AML, although justified by the need to combat illicit activities, create an environment where financial privacy is the exception, not the rule. In more authoritarian regimes, this control can be used to freeze accounts, restrict access to funds, or punish political dissidents. Even in liberal democracies, the increasing digitization of fiat money and the potential introduction of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, raise serious concerns about the possibility of even more granular control over how, when, and where citizens can spend their own money. Physical gold, held outside the banking system, offers a significant degree of privacy and resistance to censorship. It is a bearer asset, whose possession confers direct control. Transactions can occur privately, without intermediaries or centralized records. Its limitation is portability and the difficulty of use in everyday transactions. Bitcoin, on the other hand, offers a unique combination of features. Although the blockchain is public, transactions are pseudonymous, linked to addresses, not identities. With proper privacy practices, such as using mixers or the Lightning Network, a high degree of confidentiality can be achieved. More importantly, Bitcoin is censorship resistant. No central authority can freeze Bitcoins in an address to which the user controls the private keys, nor prevent a valid transaction from being included in the blockchain. It allows individuals to transact directly with each other, peer-to-peer, bypassing the traditional banking system and its requirements of permission and surveillance. For Mises, who saw private property as the foundation of freedom, this ability to possess and transact value autonomously, resistant to arbitrary interference from the state or its financial agents, would be of paramount importance. Gold and Bitcoin, each in their own way, represent a direct challenge to the state monopoly on the means of payment and the growing infrastructure of financial control, offering individuals tools to reaffirm their sovereignty over their own resources and, by extension, over their own lives. Dismantling the effects of monetary slavery is neither a simple nor a quick task. The current system is deeply entrenched, sustained by powerful interests, institutional inertia, and decades of psychological conditioning. However, understanding the mechanisms at play, combined with the availability of alternatives, opens paths for individual resistance and, potentially, for systemic reform in the long term. The first and most fundamental strategy is education. Disseminating knowledge about the history of money, the nature of the fiat system, the dangers of inflation and interest rate manipulation, and the principles of sound economics advocated by Mises is crucial. Understanding the Cantillon effect, the moral hazard in bank bailouts, and the implications of financial surveillance empowers individuals to see beyond the official narrative and to make more informed decisions about their own finances. Online forums, books, podcasts, and educational initiatives dedicated to these themes play a vital role in piercing the bubble of misinformation and apathy. The second strategy is diversification out of the fiat system. This does not necessarily mean completely abandoning national currencies, which is impractical for most, but rather consciously allocating a portion of savings and wealth to assets that offer protection against devaluation and centralized control. Physical gold, stored safely and accessibly, remains the time-tested option for preserving value in the long term and ensuring a tangible asset outside the digital system. Bitcoin, with its program, scarcity, decentralization, and censorship resistance, offers a digital alternative with the potential for appreciation and growing transactional utility, especially in international payments or in contexts where financial freedom is under threat. The ideal allocation between gold, Bitcoin, and other assets, such as real estate, shares of solid companies, will depend on the individual circumstances, risk tolerance, and time horizon, but the principle is the same: do not put all your eggs in the fiat basket. The third strategy involves building and using alternative financial infrastructures. In the case of Bitcoin, this means supporting the development and adoption of second-layer solutions like the Lightning Network, which allow for faster, cheaper, and more private transactions. It also means learning to use non-custodial wallets, where the user has full control over their private keys, rather than relying on centralized exchanges that can impose restrictions or be vulnerable to hacks and government intervention. For gold, It may involve exploring new forms of digitization or tokenization that facilitate its use as a medium of exchange, although always with attention to the risks of centralization and counterparty. Supporting businesses that accept gold or Bitcoin as payment also contributes to strengthening these alternative ecosystems. Mises firmly believed in the power of ideas and the ability of individuals to change the course of history through their choices. Although he did not live to see Bitcoin, his arguments in favor of sound money, free monetary competition, and against central planning find a powerful resonance in the value proposition of both gold and the pioneering cryptocurrency. Resistance to monetary slavery begins with the refusal to passively accept the status quo. It demands critical thinking, deliberate action, and the courage to explore alternatives that return to the individual control over their financial future. It is not about predicting the imminent collapse of the fiat system or promoting a revolution, but about building, step by step, greater resilience and personal autonomy in the face of a monetary system that, for many, has failed to fulfill its promises. The search for sound money, whether it is as old as gold or as new as Bitcoin, is, ultimately, a search for freedom itself. The interaction between gold, Bitcoin, and the ideas of Mises transcends mere economic analysis, touching on profound questions about the nature of trust, the role of technology in society, and the very evolution of the social order. Gold represents trust accumulated over millennia, a trust based on physics and history. Its acceptance does not depend on any complex algorithm or network of computers, but on an almost instinctive recognition of its lasting value. It is the personification of stability, tradition, resistance to arbitrary change. Bitcoin, in contrast, represents trust in mathematics, cryptography, and game theory. It is a product of the digital age, an attempt to create scarcity and immutability in a world of abundance and informational fluidity. Its trust lies not in matter, but in code, and the distributed consensus of a global network. Mises, with his emphasis on human action and consumer sovereignty, would probably see this competition between different forms of money as healthy. He was skeptical of monopolies, especially state ones, and argued that the market should be free to choose the best monetary instruments. The coexistence and, at times, rivalry between gold and Bitcoin can be seen as a modern example of this process of market discovery. Each serves different needs and preferences: gold for long-term value, preservation and as a tangible asset of last resort, Bitcoin for digital transferability, censorship resistance, and as a potential global and neutral medium of exchange. Their relationship is not necessarily one of substitution, but can be one of complementarity, both serving as counterweights to the fiat system. We can even make unexpected connections. Consider biology. Just as genetic diversity strengthens the resilience of an ecosystem, monetary diversity can strengthen the resilience of a global economy, offering alternatives in case one system fails. The current fiat system represents a monetary monoculture, vulnerable to systemic diseases such as chronic inflation or crises of confidence. Gold and Bitcoin introduce diversity. In art, value is subjective and often driven by the perception of rarity, authenticity, and cultural significance. Gold has always had aesthetic and symbolic value. Bitcoin, for its adherents, possesses a conceptual beauty in its elegant architecture and in its promise of decentralization, a kind of cryptographic work of art. The way societies assign value to these assets reflects deep cultural and psychological beliefs about what security, freedom, and power mean. Technology, in turn, is not only the basis of Bitcoin, but is also transforming the way we interact with gold. Think of secure vaults, online trading platforms, tokenization. The very idea of escaping monetary slavery is deeply technological, involving the use of tools, whether they are an ancient metal or a digital protocol, to circumvent the restrictions imposed by a centralized system, which raises a dangerous question. Could the technology that offers us new forms of financial freedom also be used to create even more comprehensive control systems, such as CBDCs? The battle between decentralization and centralization, between sound money and fiat money, is, in part, a technological battle, whose results will shape not only our finances, but the very structure of power in the 21st century society. We have, therefore, arrived at a crossroads. The dominant narrative of fiat money, managed by benevolent experts, shows increasingly evident fissures. Persistent inflation, the growing inequality driven by the Cantillon effect, the fragility exposed by recurrent financial crises, and the imminent threat of even greater financial control through CBDCs paint a bleak picture for those who value autonomy and economic predictability. The promise of stability has become, for many, the certainty of the erosion of purchasing power and uncertainty about the future. In this scenario, the ideas of Ludwig von Mises, far from being relics of an academic past, acquire a renewed urgency. His incisive analysis of the dangers of monetary interventionism, his passionate defense of sound money as a pillar of freedom, and his confidence in the market's ability to find the best solutions resonate deeply with the current challenges. He provides us with the theoretical lenses to understand not only what is wrong, but why. And it is in this context that gold and Bitcoin emerge not as mere speculative assets, but as concrete manifestations of Misesian principles in the contemporary world. Gold, the time-tested standard, the physical anchor against the fiat storm. Bitcoin, the radical digital innovation, the attempt to recreate the solidity of gold in the virtual domain, with additional properties of programmability and instant global transferability. Both share essential characteristics that Mises would value: limited supply and resistant to central manipulation, ability to serve as a store of value outside the direct control of the state, and potential to facilitate voluntary exchanges without coercive intermediaries. They represent a vote for verifiable scarcity instead of arbitrary abundance, for predictability instead of discretion, for decentralization instead of central control. Adopting gold or Bitcoin is not a panacea. Both have their own risks: volatility, especially Bitcoin, and challenges: secure storage for gold, technical and regulatory complexity for Bitcoin. The transition to a sounder monetary system, if it is to occur, will probably be gradual, complex, and contested. However, the mere existence and growing adoption of these alternatives represents a powerful counterpoint to the fiat monopoly. They offer individuals a choice, a potential escape route from silent devaluation and increasing control. The transformative path proposed here is not a call to arms, but an invitation to awareness and individual action. It begins with education, understanding the rules of the monetary game. It continues with prudent diversification, building a personal financial arc that can withstand the fiat flood. And it culminates in active participation, using and supporting the alternatives that promote financial sovereignty. By doing this, we are not only protecting our own wealth, we are contributing to a future where money serves humanity, and not the other way around. We are, in the manner of Mises, defending freedom, 1 gram of gold, 1 Satoshi a Bitcoin, at a time. The journey to escape monetary slavery is long and arduous, but the tools and the intellectual map are, perhaps for the first time in many decades, within our reach. The choice to use them is ours.